before we begin with Ethel's talk, we're going to be hearing a little bit from Hilary. Hilary Franklin, let me just spotlight you.
Yay!
Who is going to be talking a little bit about the fundraising appeal.
Okay. Hi everybody, it's really nice to see you here for the final talk. I'm the president of the Aberdeen Synagogue and Jewish Community Centre, and this is part of our fundraising for our new roof. So as you probably know, Skojec have organised these talks so that we can fundraise to pay for the repair of the synagogue roof, which cost us about £45,000. We've managed to raise around 30,000. We need to find the rest. So today is brilliant. So thank you to everybody who's donated. It's been really good. Every amount is really greatly appreciated and needed. We do have a donor who's agreed to match what we raise. So everything you raise, we're doubly grateful. And so far we've managed to raise around £6,000. So this is brilliant. It'll be doubled for that. So that's great. Our building has been in operation for 75 years, and we were to have our 75th celebrations in July, but these have obviously been put on hold for the time being. The building is the central hub of our community, so there was no way that we couldn't get the roof repaired. So Skojec organised these talks to help with our fundraising, and this is the last one tonight. It's a special one for me personally, because I lived in Shetland for a number of years. And I recognise all the places that Ethel talks about. It's been really good. I was given the book some years ago, as you can see, by very good friends of mine, but now I want Ethel to sign the book for me. And I've even made some of the recipes from her book, so that's fine. We're also hoping to run a klezmer concert later in the year, so more on that will be coming out later on. So I hope that you'll be able to sit back and relax in the comfort of your own home, enjoying a glass of wine, David, or coffee or tea or whatever, and take in Ethel's talk, knowing that you won't be over the limit to drive home.
Yay, thank you very much. So Ethel, I would like to introduce the wonderful, fabulous Ethel Hofman.
Oh my gosh, that is
finished yet.
Listen, I might just collapse under that.
I was with Ethel in Shetland last year. I was just completely overjoyed when I asked her at the beginning of last year if she would do a talk for Skojec when she was over in Scotland, because I've been trying to make that happen for about 5 years on and off, and we'd never quite managed to get there. And it was just so brilliant that she came. She was going to be in Shetland in August. I made it my business to be up there with her. We did the most fantastic evening in the library in Lerwick, when, like you said earlier on tonight, they had to get more and more chairs in, and eventually I think there were 75 there. So we haven't beaten that yet, but we have got 90 people registered. So but I know that there's lots of people. There's 61 computers here, and that's probably about 100 people, because there's lots of 2 people in the houses. So we're just about beaten the Shetland Library talk. I would like to introduce syndicated cookery writer, fantastic speaker, and the oldest girl of the family who grew up in Shetland in the 1940s and 50s, Ethel Hofman.
First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone who is Zooming in. It's great to do this. I was hoping to be in Scotland in July, and we were going to do a live thing in Inverness and maybe Aberdeen and certainly Shetland. But we have to put that on the back burner for now, and hopefully we'll be able to do that at some point. I'm just thrilled to be here and to share my story. And I have to tell you that I am working on a sequel. So now that I have loads of time and I'm sheltered in place, hopefully I'll get this completed pretty soon. Anyhow, Fiona, what do you want to ask me? Where do we start?
Where do we start? Tell me, why Shetland? How did your family end up in Shetland?
Okay, well, of course, it's all in the book. It's all in the book. First of all, I'm going to show you, it did so well in the United States that it was published again in the UK by Mercat Press in Edinburgh. So I'm just going to hold up the two covers. The first cover was my husband, my late husband. Can you see it?
Yes, a bit higher, by your head. Hold
Yeah,
it up.
wait a minute, but I'm not on a full screen.
That's it.
Okay, that was the first one. And then when it was done in Edinburgh, they did a different cover. This is it. And this is the one that's on sale. And it really did very well because people as far away as New Zealand, everywhere, it did very well. Let me ask you, I'm just in a little square up in the top right corner. Doesn't it do a full screen?
Everybody else can see you as
Shouldn't I
spotlight.
be in a full screen? Ah, there it is. There's on the full screen.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you. So,
All right.
tell us about how your family ended up on Shetland.
Well, you know what's really interesting? Just before in the chat room, there was a lady, Joyce Spector, I think it was, and her great aunt was married to my father. She was his first wife. I'm not sure if she died in Shetland or not. But anyway, afterwards, I want to talk to Joyce and hopefully we can Zoom and learn some more. But my father came from Russia and landed in Scotland, in Glasgow. They got off the ship, and of course, the captain had mentioned something about America. And my father and hundreds of other immigrants thought that Scotland was America. They got off. They spread all over Scotland selling needles and thread. And my father and my grandfather and two uncles decided that they were not going to be eking out a living in Shetland with all the other people who were also selling needles and thread. They decided they went up to Shetland. They took a ferry, and it wasn't really a ferry trip. It was 14 hours, and they landed in Shetland. And they were like the credit drapers. They were peddlers, but they didn't deal in clothing. They dealt in jewelry. Mm-hmm. So that was a real niche because the people of Shetland, there was nowhere for them to buy an engagement ring or a wedding band. So they started out and they did fairly well. They bought a store. They lived in an apartment, in flats around. And actually, my grandfather and my uncles, they eventually left. But my father thought that this was like utopia. I mean, there was plenty to eat. He had a roof over his head. They didn't have the Cossacks coming to conscript them. And he stayed. Yeah. And when he wanted a wife, he wanted a Jewish wife, and he went to Glasgow. And this is the short version. Went to Glasgow.
No, the long version.
We want the long version. Well, evidently, he had been married before, and I really didn't know this until Joyce, somehow or other, we got in touch, and she told me that her great aunt Fanny had been my father's first wife. So she evidently died, and then my father wanted a Jewish wife, which he couldn't have in Shetland, and he went to Glasgow, went to the Shadchan, which was the marriage broker, and my mother, my aunt, her sisters were both going to go to America, and she did not want to go, so she married my father. And she had only met him twice before they went up to Shetland. And I remember my mother saying, she got off the boat and she said, the first word she said, "Why have you brought me to this God-forsaken place?" You know, they got off the boat, they were walking along this muddy path. And my father was really very proud of what he had achieved by that time. He had bought a building, he had bought a store, and there was an apartment above the store. And that's where my mother landed up. And she really was very unhappy there because there was no synagogue, there was no Jewish community, there was no rabbi. But you know, in my book, it tells you how she really made the best of it. She made an amazing life for her children, and really kept the Jewish culture through against all odds. I mean, the people, the neighbors, and the family and the friends, they all nobody was Jewish, but they really respected my mother. She got into it. She made friends, and she instilled a tremendous feeling of Jewishness into the family, you know. And that's where I grew up. And I had an idyllic childhood. I didn't have to worry about anything. Everybody was the same. Nobody had a lot of money. We all, you know, my friends there was no problem being Jewish, other than because I would go, you know, spent holidays out in an island 15 minutes away by ferry. It was called Burra Isle, and we had like extended family there, Auntie Joanne and Uncle Johnny. And I went, Auntie Joanne was the organist at the church. And every Sunday I would we'd walk, I think it was 2 miles. And we'd all walk to the church, and Joanne would be playing the organ. And I loved the hymns, I loved the music. But every time they would mention Jesus Christ, I stopped. And on the other hand, all of our friends who became extended family, they would come and they would partake in whatever Jewish holidays we had.
Yeah.
And then when World War II came, my mother reached out. And I want to read you something in the book, because there were a lot of Jewish military. In fact, there were more soldiers on Shetland than there were in the Shetland population. And if I can just read something, wait a minute. Oh yeah. During the war, the military men and women far outnumbered the Shetland population. More than 300 Jewish soldiers were stationed in Shetland at any given time, and the green-walled kitchen above the shop was a gathering place. The kitchen was small, but when half a dozen young airmen sat in the corner armchairs and 3 or 4 army corporals lounged on the sofa, it was cozy and cheerful. So for a few hours, these young men and women could be carefree. After Shetland, they might be posted to the war front. Some of them never came back. Ma had only one rule: no smoking. I can't have this fog in here. It's not healthy. And Ethel won't be able to breathe. That was me. I was probably like 3 years old. But that didn't keep them away. They could meet other Jews, and the conversation in English, with heavy doses of Yiddish and Glaswegian, was loud and animated. At the Greenwalds, they felt at home. And that wasn't the only thing that my mother did. She gathered a group of her friends, none of them Jewish, and they made all the traditional foods for the Jewish holidays, and they would have 300 people at the army base. And she had made friends she had connected with the commanding officer, who said, Mrs. Greenwald, you can have whatever you want. You can have the kitchens, you can have a big area, dining room where people could come, you could celebrate. And my mother also got in touch with the chief rabbi, Rabbi Israel Brody in London. And he came up to Shetland. He traveled up to Shetland to conduct some of the services in Shetland. And that was a huge, huge thing. She was a remarkable woman, because here she was, the only Jewish woman on the islands. She made friends. Not only did she make friends, but she got those friends to work with her in order to entertain the young Jewish soldiers.
You told a great story about the Seder night, Passover supper. There
was Passover Seder, and my mother got she got the matzahs and she got the wine and everything. Anyhow, the wine, when the wine came up, she tasted it. It was not good wine. She called back to London and she said, you know, these young men and women are fighting for us and you send us bad wine? Well, on the next shipment was a whole load of acceptable wine. And then the other thing was at Passover, my mother ordered like, oh God, it had to be about 25 boxes of matzah.
Yeah.
And Michael Morrison in Glasgow, who had the deli, he called and he said, there's only 5 of you. Why do you need 25 boxes of matzah? And she said, well, I want to give to this neighbor, I want to give to this friend. They all wanted unleavened bread. And so she absolutely plunged into keeping the Jewish culture alive, not only for her family, but for all the young Jewish men and women who came up there, who were in the military. She was a remarkable woman.
Tell us about the title of the book, Mackerel at Midnight. What was that story?
I want to read you something about that, how I got the name. I want to read out of my book here. Wait a minute. Now, wait till I see where it was. I have it. Okay. Through the years, until she died, Ma always chuckled about the night of the mackerel feast. Leaning back in her armchair, she savored the memory and marveled. Oh my, wasn't that some supper? My mouth is watering just remembering the taste of the sea in the mackerel and those floury new tatties, potatoes, just pulled up from the yard. It was a joy to behold. Then she said, we didn't have much, but we overcame the hardships and the good times were cherished. At midnight, one midnight, and you know, remember in the north of Scotland and Shetland, it was light practically all night till midnight. 1 minute before midnight, the sun would go down. 1 minute after midnight, the sun came up. So my mother was sitting outside with Auntie Joanne, and she said, you know, and they had a really good supper because Joanne was a great cook. And she said, but you know, I really would like a piece of mackerel. I really feel it. And so the young men, they were fishermen, but they were the sons. I think it was Charlie and Jim. And they said, sure, we'll get you some mackerel. They ran down the hill. They pulled out a little rowboat and they pulled out into the little inlet, the little bay. And my husband, my late husband was there, and I believe one of my sons, Andy, they all went into the boat. They had the fishing rods, no bait, just hooks. And I got to tell you, in 10 minutes, they had a dozen mackerel. Wow. And these mackerel were pulled in, they were gutted, they ran up the hill. We had a pot of boiling water and we cooked the mackerel, we cooked the potatoes, we cooked cabbage that we had taken up from the backyard. And this was the mackerel feast. And we got around the table and Joanne had made scones and bannocks, which were flat, floury, triangular breads with fresh butter and rhubarb jam. And it really was a feast. And I thought when I was doing the book, I thought that's what I have to call it, Mackerel at Midnight. And the reason also that I even was prompted to do the book, I'm trying to remember. I was sitting next to a really good friend, and for right now the name escapes me, and she's going to be really annoyed with me because I don't name her, but if anybody remembers afterwards. Anyway, we were talking and she said, you really should write a book.
Oh, that was the lady we met at the library, wasn't it?
Can you remember the name of the woman?
No.
As soon as I get off, I'll remember. But she really inspired me to write the book after my mother died. And it was the easiest piece of work I've ever done. I just sat down and I think in about 2 or 3 months, the book was written. Everything was fresh in my mind. Wow. And I'm still trying to remember her name. I write to her all the time. I'll
Oh,
give her a special, I promise I will give her a special mention in the next book.
well, it's not just a memoir, it's also a cookery book. So tell us a little bit about how you started your life started cooking as a young person.
How did I start? Well, I went, you know, when I finished high school in Lerwick, really there wasn't a lot of careers available for young women. You either were a nurse or a teacher. And so I loved domestic science. I always got the first prize for domestic science. But, you know, when it came to hires to get to college, um, the inspector came up from London, and I was very proud of everything I'd done. I mean, we had to do a set of pajamas, I think, and the stitches were perfect. And we had to make a meal, and I did. And you know, the domestic science teacher really thought that I was, you know, way ahead of everybody else. Well, I didn't. I failed the domestic science hires, and when the inspector left, she walked out of the room. She saw me and she said, "You don't belong here."
Wow.
I was Jewish, and she failed me, and nobody could understand why I had failed. I'm not even going to go into that, but I think everybody can draw their own conclusion. Um, anyway, I did go to the College of Domestic Science. I had enough hires and lowers to get in anyway, and graduated there. And I'm just trying to say, my aunt in Chicago wrote to me, and she said, "Why don't you come out for a year?"
Yeah.
I didn't have the money to get there, and my parents certainly didn't have the money. So I went up and I taught domestic science in two of the Shetland Islands, very far north. One was Unst and one was Yell. And I spent 2 days in Yell, and then I got a ferry on the next morning, and I went to Unst. And I lived in Unst for 5 days with a wonderful family, the Hewsons, and taught at the Baltasound School. So I got isolation pay. So that's how I got the money to go over to the United States. And I came over. There was plenty of jobs. I mean, I went to Billings Hospital, University of Chicago, and I took an internship because I had never seen what you would call an aubergine. We call an eggplant over here. The only thing I'd seen were carrots, turnips, cabbage. You know, that was it. So I took the internship. I learned all about American food and about the sizes of American food, the quantities, and I worked there. And I'm trying to think how I got married, went to live in Switzerland for a year, learned all about really good European food, Switzerland. We lived in Basel. I lived on the corner of the France and Germany and Italy. We were right there. Came back to the United States. It's a long story. I mean, I worked at the Harvard School of Public Health. Then my husband and I and my two little boys came to Philadelphia. And that was really the beginning. I opened a little cooking school in my kitchen, and 5 people came. It was the beginning of cooking schools, and nobody really thought about it. And the editor of the Philadelphia Inquirer, she came. She was interested. What's this young woman doing? And she wrote about me. She wrote 2 stories in the Inquirer, and then she said to me, her name was Elaine Tate, she said, "Why don't you just write about yourself, write about what you're doing, and you'll get paid for it?" It sounded pretty good, and that's how I started my writing career. I wrote for the Philadelphia Inquirer for a number of years. And interesting, when I did the cooking school thing in my kitchen, I had to do it from 10 o'clock in the morning till 12, because at 12 o'clock my boys woke up from their nap. So that's how I started. But that's really what started my writing career.
Yeah.
And then I went on to become president of the International Association of Culinary Professionals, of which Julia Child and Jacques Papin, they were the founding members. And through Julia, I went on to publish books, and I became like a traveling cooking teacher for Lenox, China. And one of the people who owned, they didn't own Lenox, China. I think they were in one of the places that I did a cooking demonstration. She said, I'm going to do a book, and it's called Making Food Beautiful. That was my first book, because my whole focus was on the food could be good, but if it doesn't look good, nobody's going to eat it. So that was my first book.
You taught me
that from there.
You taught me that beautifully. When we were in Shetland last year, we went to restaurants. Every time we ate in a restaurant, Ethel would take photographs of the food.
Oh, yeah.
It was also beautifully presented. We had to look at it as well as taste it. So,
Right.
going back a little bit to Shetland, a lovely question from Joe Goblat. Would you like to ask it yourself about Jewish values, Joe? I've just unmuted you.
Hi, Ethel. I was in Shetland last year and saw where the shop was and the home and so on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can't see you.
Okay, and we were just delighted. So I would like to know, as I
Oh, there
watched
you are.
your footsteps in Shetland, I thought, I wonder what values Ethel took away from Shetland and have influenced your life in America, whether they be Jewish values or Scottish values. What values did you take away from that beautiful island, and how has it influenced your life in the US?
Thank you.
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that, because now I'm giving lectures on respect, tolerance, and kindness. And that's what I grew up with. Was not aware of any anti-Semitism in Shetland. The people around me, I mean, they were my quote, aunts, uncles, granny, and they taught me how to be just a good person, not to make fun of people, to think of other people, to try and help. And I remember my mother, there was one person in particular, an older man. He was always on the street with his little dog. And my mother would do things like she'd send over some soup and say, we have too much to eat here. Maybe you can use it.
Oh.
And then my father would have maybe older clothes, maybe sweaters that he didn't want. I mean, he had a shop, so he was always getting new stuff. And so my mother would say to this man, maybe you can use this. Harry has gotten too heavy, and these pants won't meet around his waist. So things like that. And then people would be sharing we shared Christmas. We went to listen to Handel's Messiah at the local church. That was something we did every year. And we'd go with my neighbors, we'd go with the Johnsons who lived next door. These are things that really stuck with me. Think of other people, respect what they're doing, enjoy their culture as well. And that has stayed with me all my life. And I tried to pass it on to my children too. When you go to visit someone, it doesn't have to be a fancy bottle of wine or flowers. If it's a woman, you can bake something, you can take it. Older people, if I'm baking, I'll give my next door neighbor something. Those are things that I think really need to be spread. The word has to be spread. We're not an island. We depend on other people. And even now, doing the Zoom, we need the connection. We need the connection, not to be bitter, not to be antagonistic, not to be angry or looking down on people. We need each other. And those are the things. I'm glad you brought that up, because if we can show our children this and teach them by example, maybe we'll have a new generation who will have a different outlook. They won't be so selfish. They won't be so introverted. They will try to reach out and live together in harmony. And this sounds like it sounds like something that's way out there, but it's basic. It's really basic. So I'm glad you asked that, Joe.
A beautiful answer to his question. I'm going to unmute Linda Davidson, who asked a nice follow-on question there about bringing up your children. So, Linda.
Hi, lovely to hear you. Your book is wonderful. I'm an ex-Glaswegian now living in London, and I wanted to know about the upbringing of your children. Did you give them a Jewish upbringing? And
Absolutely.
Yeah, and at the same time, I just wanted to tell you that my mother, Kitty Harris, came from the Cowan family, and my mother's youngest sister wrote the book called Spring Remembered, which is about, it's a memoir about a family of 11 and how they, the older children became credit drapers and went around the outlying areas selling their wares on hire purchase. So 2 little things I wanted to ask.
Thank you. Back to Ethel then.
Okay. What was the question now? I was busy writing about the book. I was writing the name of the book.
The question was
how to pass on to my children. Yes, I married someone, my late husband, Walter. He came from a very Orthodox family, but he really was more secular. He really, you know, if it's pushed down someone's throat, you kind of either take it or you go away from it. My husband did. But I had grown up where my mother, we knew when the Sabbath was. We lit candles on Shabbat, on Friday night. When my mother would bake on Friday and cook so that we had meals for Shabbat. Now, even though she had to go to the shop and work in the shop, because it was the only time that people came in from the country, and we had, you know, that's how we made a living. But we always observed the Shabbat. I did not write or sew or do anything like that until I went to college. I mean, this was, and as far as passing it on to my children, we always joined a synagogue wherever we were. We moved from Boston, we were in Dallas, we always joined a synagogue so that we had more, and it was at that time, it was more for a social thing than anything else. We didn't always go to services on Shabbat, but we were with other Jewish families. And my children were bar mitzvahed. They were confirmed in Shavuot. And with one person, one boy, it stuck. And with the other one, it didn't really. But our house, we always observed all of the holidays. And the holidays in our house in Philadelphia were big. We had a lot of people. We invited Jews and non-Jews. And so my boys grew up in a very Jewish atmosphere.
Tell us about your brothers, your whole family growing up in Shetland. How did they take the Jewish and all that sort of stuff?
Well,
I know one of them's in the room, but I'm just asking you this now.
Yeah, well, my brother Jack and Anne are very observant. I mean, being observant to me doesn't mean that you have to go to services every Shabbat. You can be Jewish and you can be observant without that. You can observe the holidays. You can light candles on Friday night, which is what my brother and sister-in-law and we do that faithfully. And of course, growing up in Shetland, my mother, we had a Jewish household. We had the candles lit, and we had at least when I was growing up, we had Friday night dinner, and we always had a chicken on Friday night. when I was growing up. Now, maybe Jack is going to say that he didn't have that, but I did. And my mother cooked just cooking, just the things we ate. I mean, we had a barrel of herring every at the end of the summer. My father would get a barrel of herring, we'd store it in the garage, and my mother would make chopped herring and fried herring and gefilte fish and the kugels. All of those things were what we ate. And one of the things in one of my books, I say, you know, when my neighbors were eating fried herring and we were eating chopped herring, and when they were eating, when they were boiling fish, we were eating gefilte fish. So I mean, I was raised on an Ashkenazi diet, really. So that's, and although now I mean, and still, I mean, and my mother always brought in, she sort of integrated Scottish cooking, Shetland cooking with the Ashkenazi cooking. I mean, we would have rhubarb jam and scones and bannocks, but we would also have kugels and I'm just trying knishes and fish, you know, chopped herring and gefilte fish. Those were staples in the household. So we really lived very well. And even though now you feel that we have to have so much fresh produce, you know, we lived on the cabbage and the carrots and the turnips, and that was brought into our everyday living too. So.
And was that mainly grown in Shetland, or did it come in on the boats?
Excuse me?
Were the vegetables mainly grown on the island, or came in on the boat?
Yeah, the only thing that we could grow, even other than in the summertime, were root vegetables. In the summertime, we would have. Oh, wait a minute! Something went off on my phone. No, and then of course my father was really, he would buy things wholesale, and he would bring home strawberries that were half, by the time they got up the Shetland, they were half, you know, overripe. And my mother was really good at making the jams and preserves, and we would have that through the, you know, throughout the winter. But as I said, we grew up on an Ashkenazi diet, very heavy on dairy products, fat, sour, you know, cheeses and things. And my mother would make her own cheese. She would make what they called kern milk, which was really like a cottage cheese. And she'd put the sour milk in a handkerchief or a muslin bag, hang it over the sink, and it would all, you know, all the moisture would come out, and we would have like a cottage cheese. So she was very good at doing all of those things. And that was part of the Jewish culture, how we ate, you know, the Eastern European Ashkenazi dishes. That was what we ate.
She must have been really well trained. So somebody asked, Annette asked, what kind of family did her mother come from? Did they live, where did they live in Glasgow?
What kind of
family did your mum come from? Where did they live?
She came from a very observant Jewish family. They had come from Lithuania, and they ended up in the Gorbals, where most of the immigrant Jews lived. And she had no formal training. I mean, she watched how her mother cooked, and she cooked the same way. There was no formal, and of course, when she lived in the Gorbals, she could get all the matzahs and all the things that were in the Eastern European Jewish cooking. But when she got up to Shetland, she really had to think on her feet, and she had to improvise. It was fairly easy because the fish was there, all the fresh fish was there. The dairy products were there, the eggs were plentiful, butter was plentiful, sour cream was plentiful. So all the basic ingredients for the way the Jewish cooking was there. Um, and that's how she improvised. And of course, you know, when she got up there, there was no kosher butcher. Uh, there was a lot of fish, but there was no kosher butcher. So my mother would use chicken. She would use lamb, and she would say, you know, even though it hasn't been killed the way it should be killed ritually, um, God will forgive me because my children have to have protein. And so we ate chicken. We never ate pork, which wasn't really a problem because the Shetlanders didn't eat pork either. Very few people had a pig. Um, they didn't eat, and as far as shellfish, uh, lobsters were a big commodity, but they were sold to the people they were shipped down to Scotland and England. And I remember someone saying when I went up to teach in one of the islands, they would get a lot of lobsters. And the woman I lived with said, we wouldn't eat them anyway. They're just ugly red things. And they would just send them down, and they got a good price when they sent them down to England because they were a delicacy.
Fabulous. We have another question from Joe Goblat, who says, has anybody ever approached you to make a film or documentary of your book, and who would you want to play you? Which Hollywood or British actress would you want to play your mum and you?
Well, I have to think about that. But I was on the verge of having the book developed into a movie, and then of course there wasn't funding. And I keep thinking I should pursue that, you know, go on to Kickstarter or something. I can't even think of people who would it would have had to be for my mother. It would have had to be a real, somebody like Judi Dench, you know, she would have played my mother. I would like to think that somebody glamorous would play me, but I don't know about that. But really, it would make a very good documentary, especially now when people are not so caught up. They can't be so caught up in careers and work, and people are more blending together with families at home. And I think people also are looking at maybe a simpler way of life, but combining with high tech like Zooming, you know. But there are things that you can't do. You can't go out to a coffee shop and have a cup of coffee. You can't even have someone come to your house and have a cup of coffee. I think that that's going to happen, though. I think that there's going to be a time that people do not want to go to restaurants and mingle with people at coffee shops or tea rooms. And I would hope, and maybe it will happen, that there will be more gathering at home and having entertainment at home, whether it's over a meal, whether it's over a cup of coffee, whether it's having a group come together with a guitar and an accordion. And that's what happened when I was living up in Unst. They didn't call them ceilidhs because that's really Scottish, but people would come together at someone's house and we'd pass around tea and cake, and there would be a group together in a corner playing, playing folk music, and then a couple of people would get up and dance. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but I would think that this whole situation is not going to disappear for a very long time. Yeah. And I think that in the meantime, we may be able to come together in someone's house, and we'd be going from house to house. We'd be making our own entertainment. And because of high tech, it can be done, it'll be done on a different level. So that's what I'm hoping, and it may happen
I'm sure
because
you're right. Yeah.
people are not going to want to go to restaurants. You wouldn't. I mean, I personally will not go to a restaurant or a coffee shop. I would rather have someone come to my house. I
So,
don't.
a couple more questions. Jackie says, do you still cook those Ashkenazi dishes today, or has your cooking style become more eclectic?
No, I have a book. One of my books is called Everyday Cooking for the Jewish Home,
And the nice one.
and it's by HarperCollins. It A lot of the dishes in there are very, very Eastern European. And for example, at holidays here, my grandkids love the kugels that I make. I mean, there's a kugel in that book. I think it's on page 34. I even talked about it with my brother in Shetland, Roy, and they love that. I mean, there's pineapple in it. The basic thing is pasta, noodles, and that's a basic ingredient. And then you can put anything else in. And my mother would make these kugels, and she would put raisins in, and she would put eggs and the cottage cheese. And these things were all available in Shetland. So when we have our Passover seders or Rosh Hashanah, I always, and of course there's the honey. And my mother she would make the the mortar with the apples and apples and nuts and honey and a little red wine, charosses. That I pass on to my children, and they're doing the same thing out in California.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Nice
so.
question. Sorry.
So these dishes, these are how our culture really lives on and passed on. And even though people may be on a diet, they will, for that one day or that one night, they will dig into those dishes, those kugels, those blintzes, there's at Passover, there's the matzah that you beat up with eggs and maybe cheese, and people, they love it, and even non-Jews love those dishes. So that's how we pass on part of our heritage, is through food.
Jackie has a follow-on question, which is, are you connected with the Research Institute in New York? YIVO is doing a Zoom course in Ashkenazi cooking at the moment. Did you know that?
Which course?
YIVO, Y-I-V-O, YIVO, is it called? YIVO. The Jewish Research Institute in New York is doing a Zoom course in Ashkenazi cookery.
I know. I wasn't connected with that so far, but I am going to connect with them.
But David Nelson's got a question about borscht. So
I have two questions.
Yes.
Can you, just to help us anchor it, can you tell us the year you left Shetland?
I can. I'm just thinking. I came to the United States in 1959.
That'll do.
I must have left, but I must have. That was after I had been to college in Glasgow and done a year in Unst.
Okay.
So we go back. Oh my gosh, 1959, 1955.
Fine. The cooking question. Your mother was a Litvak.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Do Litvaks make borscht with cabbage or with beetroot?
That was another thing I forgot to talk about. Beetroot was another root vegetable that grew profusely in Shetland.
So you made beetroot borscht.
And one of the dishes that my mother made every single week was she cooked beetroot soup borscht, and we would have it with potatoes. And I remember those beetroots, and my fingers would be all red because we had to grate the cooked beetroots. I remember that. That I forgot all about. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, so I think we've done. all the questions, all the chat. I'm just going to quickly go on to, I'm going to take off the spotlight for a moment, and I'm going to go onto gallery view, if everybody does that. And if anybody's desperate, if anyone's got a question that you're desperate about and you're on video, I'm just going to whiz through all the pictures. Loads of
Wait, you know what? Before you go off, I see up in the corner my cousin, my first cousin, Louis Greenwald is up there. Louis, I can't believe you didn't have a question.
Louis, I shall unmute him.
Can you unmute him? He's got a wonderful Scottish accent.
Okay, off you go, Louis.
Okay, Louis, what are you going to tell me?
Ethel, it is just spellbinding listening to you, knowing you lived it. I had the chance to visit the Shetlands a few times, a child and then as an adult, and I'm still amazed by everything that happened. I could add some things about some of the experiences, but I think you bring away a true value of Scotland and the Shetlands, and are a tremendous representative of that kind of upbringing where everyone can live together in peace and harmony.
That's absolutely wonderful. I couldn't have done a better thank you myself. So I would like to draw this to a close by just, you can talk a little bit more afterwards, Ethel, but we'll turn off the recording and just be informal after that. So I just want to thank you so much for spending this time with us, giving us 40 minutes of your time and your memories and answering our questions.
It was special for me.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I just want to thank everybody for zooming in. I mean, I always learn a lot from listening to other people and having questions. And I also want to say that Louis grew up in Inverness, where I believe there's still a Jewish community. But thank you all. Thank you it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
We'll take off the spotlight video so that you can all watch, and you put it on gallery view so you can all see each other. Yeah.